All right, everyone, welcome back. So this is part two of just a discussion on Christian history, theological history of resistance to the government and how Christians have seen these things for 2,000 years. This video might be a bit shorter than the last one because I'm going to focus on the French reformers. And in many ways, they were pretty similar to Luther. They just developed his thoughts a little bit. So I want to just give a bit of context to that. And hopefully that if you understand how Christians have been thinking, seeing these things, and wrestling with these questions for 2,000 years, they will help you make your own decisions before God when it comes to questions like, with the government says churches shouldn't meet, should we still meet anyway and gather for worship? If the government says you're not allowed to see your friends and family, you're not allowed to gather with them to celebrate Christmas, do Christians automatically obey that? Or is there such a thing as conscientious objection and rightful disobedience? So I'm not here to make those decisions for you. I'm just a pastor. You must make these decisions before God. But I want to give you some context to be able to make these decisions. So if you didn't see it already, the former one was on Luther. It kind of builds to this and develop a little more. And then next time we're going to talk about the English, because how it developed in England was significantly different, I think, than the French and the Germans, and that laid the foundations for the founding of America. In the meantime, if this is a subject that interests you, please hit the like and subscribe button there just below the video, and you'll hear more of these. So in France, Protestantism was spreading, and it was spreading fast. The French church, the Catholic Church, had been very superstitious. There had been a lot of emphasis on the apocalypse. They were thinking the Antichrist was going to come any day now. Just like a lot of times when I go on my Facebook feed, everyone's convinced that the vaccine is the mark of the beast and everything. And since I've been alive, like every 5 years, something else is the mark of the beast. Well, it was like this, just all over France, very superstitious. The Antichrist is coming every day. This is the mark of the beast. Constantly. And so when John Calvin came on the scene, his writings were very rational, very theologically precise and thought through, and it just filled a void in French spiritual thinking of rational theology. And many people throughout France, even many of the nobility, many people high up in the social chain, if you will, they converted to Catholicism. But the king was very much against this. The very top. And so there was persecution of the Huguenots. Sometimes it was regional, but sometimes it was almost throughout the country. The great kind of the big day that gets a lot of press is St. Bartholomew's Day, where the Protestants were sort of lured in with the promise of a marriage, and they just ended up being butchered by the thousands, by the tens of thousands even. Now, to the credit of the majority of the Catholic leaders, it seems, my own view on St. Bartholomew's Day is that it wasn't intended, it wasn't an intentional massacre. Okay, how can you have an unintentional massacre? What I mean is when the marriage, when the whole wedding was planned, and there's supposed to be an alliance, a marriage alliance between the Protestants and the Catholics to bring peace to the nation. Most of the Catholic leaders were genuine in wanting to do this, but there became a fear that the king was going to die, that the Protestants were poisoning him, and just panic spread. And the killing of Protestants began, and it went outside Paris and to different regions. And after that, the Protestants were like, well, what do we do? And for the Protestant thinkers, from Calvin and many of the others, it was when a king stops being a king and starts being a tyrant, Romans 13 is no longer applicable. Because the context of Romans 13 is that this authority, governed by God, will, what does Romans 13 says? It says that he will punish the evil and he will reward the good. And a tyrant is no longer doing that. And so that you are no longer bound in such cases. There was Beza, particularly. This was Calvin's protege. He really developed this thought. He took it. He developed more intellectually than Calvin did. So, and he argued from the Old Testament that the authority of the king comes from the people. He went back in French history because at this time in France there was this emerging idea. It was still in its infancy stages in some ways, but this idea, emerging idea, of a divine right monarch, that authority comes from God to the king, and then the people need to submit to the king. Beza pointed back, and he went back. He and the other, not just Beza, but some of the other French thinkers and reformers point out that if you go back far enough in French history, the French king was appointed by the nobles. He was sort of elected. He was put there by the people to work for the good of the people. And once he stops doing that, so he gets his authority from the ground up, not from the top down. And even, hundreds of years later, if the understanding of that had changed, that's how it originally started. The French king was put there by the people. He was elected, so to speak. Therefore, if the French king, he may think that he believe in this whole divine right stuff, but that's not how it started. And so Beza points to this out in the Old Testament. Israel predated Israel's king. There was Israel, and then when Saul came along, he didn't just appear and said, now everyone obey me. He had to be appointed by the people. The elders of Israel came and appointed him and recognized his kingship. So God chose him, but the people also appointed him. And therefore, they were ultimately accountable to the people. So, Beza and some of these other French reformers, the conclusions are the same as Luther's and Calvin's, but they intellectually develop. They give more of an intellectual structure and reason why, that it's just not God, government, people. It's God gives authority to people, and then they elect and choose a leader, and that leader is ultimately responsible back to the people. Okay, you see how this is affected now our many of our modern day understandings of government, of constitutions, of where authority rests. It's very different than the Greco-Roman idea, where all the authority comes from the Caesar, particularly after Julius Caesar, where the Senate had much less power, and everything emanated from Caesar. And a local Roman governor, he got his authority from Caesar, and the people had to do what he said. Well, this understanding of how government should work and the Constitution, the basis of a government, this was changing things. Now, we'll get more into England later. They had the Magna Carta and this idea that even the king was supposed to be below the law, and therefore law is the ultimate authority, not the leaders. We'll talk about that more in the next video. But just to say that the conclusions are the same. The French reformers agreed with Luther, which we talked about in the last video, which when the people, because the French reformers were also socially conservative, they didn't want chaos, they didn't want anarchy, they didn't want some bloody revolution. They said that, the Christians, the church needs to support. If the king, if the prime minister, if the president is doing evil, the church needs to support the lesser magistrates still. So you still need to find a prince. You still need to find a noble. You need to find someone who's doing what is right within the existing system and support them. And hopefully that lesser magistrate will become the new upper magistrate. The lesser leader will become the new leader, because none of these guys were into anarchy. None of these guys were into general revolution and the common man just raising up to throw off the system. None of them thought that was good. None of them thought that was God honoring. But when the top magistrate ceases doing what he was elected for and put there for, and using his authority in an abusive way, you find a lesser magistrate who you can support with a good conscience. To replace them. So again, we're going to talk about this one more video. Like and subscribe. Just to let you know, we do hit on these themes a little bit in the book, The Girl and the Guardian. Now, this is a sort of like a fantasy fiction version of Esther and Mordecai, epic in the Bible that I wrote this year. It's the first of a trilogy, but this is just all on Esther right here. It's a fun read, but it does touch a little bit on these subjects, because a big part of the book is Mordecai. He supports Xerxes, the king, and protects him, but he refuses to bow before the viceroy, Haman. So why do you support one authority, but you refuse to bow before the other authority? This is a big question for us. We need discernment in which leaders to support, which ones to resist. So I'll probably put the link to this book, the Amazon link, to this in the comments below. So if you're interested and kind of want a fun read, but a fun fantasy read, but one that's really theologically charged, The Girl and the Guardian, first in the Oliver Anderson series. Okay, in the next video, we'll be talking about how these things played out in England and, maybe even to the founding of America.